Hi, welcome to Go Ahead, Write Something, the podcast for writers who want motivation and the deep down truths about getting published and how to find joy in writing your stories and sharing them with the world. I'm Tessa Smith McGovern, author and instructor on Zoom for the Writing Institute, Sarah Lawrence College, as well as 2 free weekly writing sprints for the Westport Library. I run Bloom Writers Studio and am a scout for the Allen Literary Agency.
And I'm Patricia Dunn, aka TM Dunn, author, writing instructor, and coach, and have shepherded many authors to publication.
Today, our guest is Wanjiku-Wa Ngūgī, who is a faculty member at Vermont College of Fine Arts, MFA in Writing, and my professor this semester. So some serious brown-nosing going on here. She's the author of the novel The Fall of Saints and more recently Seasons in Hippoland. Her short stories and essays have appeared in Nairobi Noir, Houston Noir, and St. Petersburg Review, among others. Wanjiku is the recipient of the Bronze Panther Prize 2014 for greatly enhancing the mutual understanding between different cultures and reduced biases between peoples. She has a PhD in English and Creative Writing at Georgia State University, an MFA in Creative Writing and Literature from the University of Houston, and a BA from New York University, and she lives in Atlanta, GA.
Seasons in Hippoland tells an incandescent tale of Mumbai sent to live in Hippoland as a child. Once grown, Mumbai returns to her homeland to relate a magical story that challenges their understanding and imagination. And that was Ms. Magazine. Part fairy tale, part political parable, Seasons in Hippoland is a powerful novel whose women are resilient and creative in the face of oppression. That was Forward Reviews. Takes readers to the fictional African nation of Victoriana, where one woman's childhood stories threaten to change everything for her people, who have long lived under the rule of deceitful empire for life. Bustle, most anticipated book of December 2021. All right, that's a mouthful of reviews. So
That's some good reviews.
Yes, awesome.
So today we're talking about things that get in the way of writing. And Wanjiku and I would, as you might guess, we were talking about that with my own writing, and she was sharing her experience. And I said, we have to do this for the podcast because there's not a writer out there who doesn't come across an obstacle from time to time.
And if they don't, we don't like them, right? So,
well, we want to learn from them. So, Wanjiku, can you first of all tell us about your own writing process? How do you go about things?
Oh gosh, it's a difficult question, but it's also but I guess in a nutshell, I make sure to write, to set a day in a week to do some writing. It could be any kind of writing. It doesn't, whether I'm in the mojo or not, I'm going to write something. Mm-hmm. It could be an essay, it could be a short story, maybe a novel that I'm working on, but it's a writing day. So when you do that, I think because I started doing that a while ago, what happens is like Friday is my writing. It just becomes part of your makeup, so to speak. And if I don't do it because maybe I have to travel or I have to be somewhere else, I always feel like I'm missing out on something, right? Now, it doesn't mean that writing is good or great, or inspired for that matter, but at least I've done the
show up. Yeah.
And for the most part, what I do is that whatever I write, obviously I save it. If I think it's horrible, I save it anyway and revisit it 2 months later. And sometimes it's the case where I think, this was actually not bad. This wasn't bad. Mm-hmm. Or it's like, no, this was really bad, but it's way much later in the game for me to feel like a waste of time or anything like that. So yeah, that's pretty much.
So that's interesting. And the gap is crucial, right? Because you're not invested in it being good if you've left it for a month or two.
No, you're not. Yeah. And you're not even clear what you were writing about, right? Because in the moment you're writing something, you're thinking, I am going to describe this. I'm going to write this about this thing. But because you're not so invested and you leave it once you feel horrible about it, when you come back to it, because you're not pegged into a particular outcome, you might find some use for it. You could use it for, maybe it's something you need to plug in. Maybe you need to, or become something else altogether. married to it at that point, so you could mold it to fit in whatever you want. So yeah, absolutely.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I always tell people to follow their gut, but when it comes to writers, I say don't pay any attention to your instincts because often when you write something, your worst stuff can be your best stuff when you look at it later. So that's actually a really good point.
So how does that work with your novel writing? Does that mean that when you restart your novel, you come back to write more, you don't look back at what you did previously? How do you, if that's the case, how do you remember exactly where you were and get back into it?
Okay, so especially when I was writing Seasons in Hippoland, when I left the work, when I came back to the work, I needed to read because I was using a particular voice and you're trying to get into a particular space, if you like. So what I would do is that I would quickly read through, depending on where I was. If I was page 200 and something, then I probably just read the last sort of 50, 60 pages, or so to speak. But there, I'll do that because it helps you get into that space you are in, that sort of motivated or, inspired space, if you like. What I know not to do now, because I did not know this in the beginning, when I started writing, when I know not to do is to try to change where it's, or try to edit the story or the novel in any way, shape, or form. If I feel strongly about a particular scene, I just make a quick note, highlight it in red, and then go back to my 80 whatever page I was on and continue writing. Because I realized once I did that, once I start editing myself, before I finish the story or the novel, for me, and I know different writers feel differently about this and work very differently. But for me, it interrupts my sort of creative process, if you like. Then I start questioning too much. I think this is not even clever. This is not good. This is not going anywhere. But the reality is because I haven't figured out what really happens at the end. So There's no need for me, I feel, to sort of start editing the first page when I don't know what this character actually really wants in the end, right?
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah. But it's different for writers, and you have to find the space that's comfortable for you, I think, because I have a friend who will not move on until they're done with chapter 1 and so on and so forth. But then I think they have outlines. My friend has an outline. They have chapter 1, this happens, chapter 2, this happens, and I don't write outlines. So, yeah.
So do you outline your work after the first draft, or you don't outline it at all?
No, after the first draft, then I read it again and then try to see what it is, what's happening in it. What am I trying to do? So I would have some sort of, no outline, but I have ideas about what I would like for each. So what I do is when I read it through, then I come back and then I think, okay, chapter 1 doesn't really work at all, or this character became redundant in the middle of the page, so I need to take care of that, or I need to expand on this some more, or this novel has no setting. I have not this, that kind of thing. I look for the things that are working for the story, that make the story come alive, right? So I'm not going too deep into it. I just want to make sure that the story is logical in a way, in that just the story itself, not
right. And when you made the transition from reading your previous work and then learning to not go back and edit it, did you have to be very strict with yourself, or was that just a quick, this is an insight, I'm making that change? Or did it take, I find that really hard not to get nitpicky about my own work.
It was very hard because you just want to, especially this sentence is terrible. Who writes like that? What kind of is this anyway? Because you're hard on yourself as a writer anyway, right? So the thing that you're writing, and because you're not very sure about it, so you beat yourself, beat up yourself a lot. But so it was very difficult. Even now, I have to refrain. That's why I do the pen. I do like redo this in red and keep moving, right? I think it's hard to do that because you just want to sort of, you feel you critique yourself so much, and
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
So can I ask you, first, what inspired you to become a writer? Was this something you wanted to do from childhood, or did you read a book? I mean, what was that made you say, okay, this is what I want to do?
I grew up in a family of writers. My dad is a writer. So I used to watch him write, which was particularly very interesting to me. And I would ask him things like, okay, tell me about this writing. Where do the stories that you're writing, where do they come from? You know, I was quite little. And then I thought, so I would write a little bit. I always wanted to write. And then I didn't want to write anymore at all. If anything, I wanted to walk away from all of it. And then I remember reading Bessie Head. She's a South African writer. I think I might have mentioned this, Tessa, I'm not sure. But Bessie Head is a South African writer who's late now. And I remember reading Bessie Head and thinking, gosh, what a question of power, I think I remember. And I thought, wow, what a novel. Like how? I would love to write something like this. Which is, anybody can dream, right? But I was quite young and I thought, yeah, one day, maybe I'll do it, But what I most wanted to do when I became a young adult is to write theater and plays and things like that. So that's what I've been writing before I decided, okay, I think I'm going to write these stories now. And this, I'm going to work on some novels and see.
So you changed from playwriting to going back to stories and novels.
Yeah. And
why?
And I don't know that I think I'm still interested in it. It's just like, now I'm captivated completely by the form, by, writing novels and writing short stories. So I haven't really given up on it. I still love, but it's like some other loves have also.
That's so, it is captivating. Yeah. It's like an addiction almost in a way where you can't, it's an obsession where you can't give up these questions of, and so with your students, do you see, is that hard for everyone to not go back and tweak too much? What do you see with the students that you have? Are they all very different? Do they all have common pitfalls, and how do they get around them?
I mean, I think students are all different because everybody writes. What brings everyone to writing is such a different story, all interesting, all valid, of course. I think the biggest thing that students and seasoned writers, I would say, have in common, I think, it's just how difficult it is. And I mean, I think when you start out writing, if you're a young writer, for instance, you don't realize because there's this idea, I think we're so used to seeing finished. There's a great novel, it's won many awards, and they're reading these great passages and the sentences sound so good. And it's, what you don't know is what was behind that. How many hours it took to get that sense, right? So I always feel like when I teach, for instance, undergraduate students, that's what I'm trying to say. Is like, no, 2 drafts are not enough to get your story where it needs to go, where it needs to be, for it to come alive for the reader. It takes a work, tons of revisions. So
if it's so hard, painful in some time, painful. Yeah. So why would you keep doing it?
Because of what Tessa said, it's an addiction. You want to see this world come alive. And the other part to this is that the creative process itself, and Tessa, I'm sure you agree, is like, it's like meditative, right? When you are allowing your creative process,
that flow
to, that's such a good thing, because you sit there and you just make up these things, and so joyful, so great, right? When you come to read it, then you realize, or when you're reading it through or whatever it is, you realize like, fine, I'm the only person who probably understands this. How do I get this so that another person can understand what's in my brain? Because what happens, like you have this imagination, you imagine this beautiful thing in your head, but putting the beautiful thing onto the paper is the hardest. This bridging that gap is a difficult part. But because you've had that process, you've created this thing, and you want it to come alive, and even you want to understand the characters. So you do the work, and then you get to a point, I think after so many revisions, when it starts coming alive, I feel like that's what every author is chasing. It's that high of like, oh, this is what I was doing all along. Oh my goodness. Okay, so they actually are doing this. This is what they want. It's such a good feeling. And I think everybody is chasing that. at least
Right.
I think that's what makes me go about, because it's so pleasurable. It's a really good feeling to work at something and start to see it come alive, you know.
So what's been the hardest part of your career in writing?
The writing.
The writing. Okay. Aside from the writing, I guess, because then there's the next step. We want to get you're not writing journals. We want to get our books published. And so your path to publication and.
I mean, I think that's always hard. Just trying to get anything published, right? People not believing in your work, or writing these short stories, spending hours and hours on them, and then, finally finding a home, but nobody's paying you anything, or the money's so little. But I feel like that's every writer, maybe not all writers, but at least a significant number of us, do feel like, it would be nice if, you were compensated for all the hours. I think you do it. But what makes you write is so powerful and so strong that you will do it anyway. Right?
Yes, if we can set aside that painful moment by being strict enough to not go back and to not critique, then we can get to that flow bit. That's the reward. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The reward for even doing it. If nobody ever reads it, it's still a reward.
It's still a reward, It really, really is. I know people who write poetry for themselves, and never share it with anyone. They spend hours and hours, and then there's something about it, something about creating something.
Yeah. So would you say that it's seeing your students just do the writing? You have to get back to it. It's a lived experience, right? It's not something you can have a theory about and fix things in theory. You have to sit down and do the writing to get to that point, even if it's terrible. Even if it's throwaway material. Yeah,
that's what I think it's always really nice when I think like a student gets it, like, so this is just hard for everybody, right? Like, it's just, I just have to sit down and dedicate hours of my entire of my life doing this. And I think and then when I talk about revision a lot, especially when I teach workshop, and I have taught like a revision workshop where it's just, we're talking about revision all the time, so that we can students can get a grasp of what I'm talking about when I say revision. I'm not saying 2-3 drafts. No, I'm not. I'm talking detailed, a deep dive into figuring out what your novel is. But yeah, so it's always so nice when a student has that moment of, it's not that I'm a terrible, bad writer or that I'm not getting this. It's just that I haven't given enough time to this.
I think I might have just had that moment.
Yeah, I have them every day. Yes, every day.
Yes. Every day. I've just had it. This is
every day. I beat myself up, then I go like, I got to work harder.
But and you have 3 books out already, so
very painful. Yeah. Anyway, but there's been good stuff too. But it is that kind of obsession where like somebody once said you have to really love it. It was Grace Paley to do it, and then I had a student that said I don't really love it. I just have no choice. So it's like that. Yeah. So we have to keep doing that. So with your students or with any writers that are listening, or aspiring writers, what would you like? What tips, or could you? Even when you talked about revision, a lot of people mix up revision with editing, and I think it was a really good point that you made. They're 2 different things. But what would you tell other writers? How do you keep going day after day and month after month, year after year, decade after decade?
I just keep at it, right? Just keep writing, just keep plugging away. And what you were saying earlier, I think it's also important to understand that it's because, there's this idea that writing is sort of this, this thing that you do that is just meditate, there's
this abstract
romanticized idea about writing. And, I always say like, writing is not always happiness, right? But you get something meaningful from it, right? Mm-hmm. There's something meaningful. And I think meaningful, just because you're doing something meaningful doesn't mean that you're going to be happy all the time.
No, that's a great quote.
Yeah. But so you're not happy, you're frustrated, you're all those things, but it's meaningful.
And as long meaningful.
Right. As long as you have that, if it's meaningful for you, you will keep doing it no matter what.
I love that. writing isn't happiness, but it's meaningful. That's really important to remember.
And have you had stories that you've left because they weren't meaningful enough?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've thrown away stories because I didn't understand. I didn't understand where they were going, and even I've given them time and coming. Like I have a story that I've been struggling. I feel like I know what I want to write. I know but I can't get that story out. I've worked on it believe me, I have worked on that story for a considerable amount of time, but it's just not working. So I've decided to leave it now for like over a year. I'm just going to leave it for a year. Right. So that happens sometimes. Like there's stories that are not working out for you, no matter even if you come back to them like 3 months later, they're still not working out. But there will be one or two that sort of, that it will happen basically.
Right.
If you're revising a short story and you've revised it over and over and over and over again, and you're getting diminishing returns, you're not, it's okay to set it aside, really. Mm-hmm. Also, like, it's okay to give yourself permission without beating yourself up. It's like, okay, I think maybe it's just that something I'm not getting, and I've put it aside. We can always do a year, because I can always write another story, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Obviously, you want to be cautious about getting into a difficult moment and then starting something else, getting into a difficult moment, starting something else. Mm-hmm. You also just want to push yourself as much as you can to try to finish something,
Right. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I have a really exciting announcement, which is that for the first time, we have a giveaway. We have Wanjiku's beautiful book, Seasons in Hippoland. The cover is absolutely glorious. And the first lucky reader to email, I happen to have it, so you're emailing me at tessasmithmcgovern@gmail.com, put Hippoland in the subject line, and your address, your name and address in the body of the email. And the first sender of an email will receive this glorious book in the post. Yes. So there we have it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. It's absolutely mesmerizing, I will say. And I'm going to have to break it down a bit for why I don't quite understand why it's so mesmerizing. I sat down to read a few pages, and then I was like, 15 pages later, I looked up and sort of took a breath. So it's mesmerizing. And I love the voice. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much, Wanjiku.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. And you've inspired me.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yes.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
And for being such an inspiration. Thank you.
And thank you to the Westport Library for hosting this podcast. And for all of you listening, this has been Go Ahead, Write Something. Remember, writing can be hard, but you don't have to do it alone. And we hope you'll join us next time.